Oh, okay. So I'm going to start again since we're recording. My name is Ivy Cook, and I'm here with Lily Nkunzimana. I hope I'm getting Nkunzi.
You were very good the first time.
Oh, man.
Impressive. Yes.
Okay. I'll keep practicing. For some reason, I get it right sometimes. We're the co-chairs of the NGO Committee on the Status of Women Working Group on Peace and Gender Equality. Thank you to everyone who's joining from online. There's quite a few of you up there and the room here as well. And we really appreciate the speakers who have joined us. So excited about the program to come, actually. I will not have a long introduction. The working group started a few years ago. I think Lily is going to give some opening remarks that explains a little bit more of what we're trying to accomplish here. Okay, Lily.
Thank you so much, Ivy. And I just want to reiterate appreciation for all of our panelists who've come in person and who are also joining us online. As Ivy mentioned, I serve as one of the co-chairs of this working group. And I'll just share a little bit of background and then we can hand it over to our wonderful speakers. So as many of you know, NGO CSW is one of the networks of organizations that facilitates the participation of civil society into the Commission on the Status of Women. It facilitates both in-person participation, but also online participation. And I think as all of us know, there is a very large and impressive groundswell of activists who are concerned about the well-being of not just the rights of women, but also the well-being of the world. And I think we feel it especially at the start of this year. There's a lot of concerning developments that we're all, I'm sure, following in globally, regionally, and nationally. And I think from not just Beijing, but other global convenings, the amazing work that women have done as peace builders in so many different contexts, we can all attest to the power of this group of people who have always been constant, who have always been there and have always been advocating. But we have also seen that within it is the nature of the work that we're doing, and I think also the proliferation of various NGOs, that sometimes we, by necessity, need expertise in particular areas. And sometimes that can create this kind of very specialized areas of work within the movement. And so what we're trying to do as a working group is to see how do we benefit from the groundswell of individuals within this movement, but also connect to a very specialized area of the women, peace, and security agenda and associated spaces that has developed over the past 25 years. And we have experts who will share with us how this agenda has evolved over time. But I think that the Commission on the Status of Women presents this opportunity where we have literally tens of thousands of people who convene here in New York. How do we benefit from that presence of individuals here in the city? And how do we bridge these two spaces? And how do we build and move forward? Earlier, I was just having a conversation with one of our dear members about how, there are a lot of people who are facing unimaginable difficulties. And I think many of us are coming to realize that hopelessness is not a choice. It's just not an option. And there's a lot of good work that's being done. And of course, for this particular working group, our advocacy has been, there are these 12 areas of critical concern within the context of Beijing. One of them is, women in conflict. So of course, within the WPS agenda, this is being addressed in a particular way. But this particular area of critical concern has not been addressed at CSW more than 20 years. Right. So how do we bridge this gap? And so we're hoping that maybe the priority areas for the next 4 CSWs has been decided upon. But is there a way to bring this critical area concern for the next series of sessions of the Commission? So that's just a bit of a background on the advocacy of the working group, our endeavor to learn from each other, there are people who've been working on WPS for decades, right? So how do we learn from that? And then how do we help each other too? Because ultimately, we all want to build communities where, and in every locality where violence has no place. I think that is the desire that we all have. So how do we do that moving forward? So with that, I will hand it over back to, actually, no, sorry. We will have our first speaker, and then we'll have a panelist. So I would like to introduce our first speaker, who's going to be Dr. Pablo Castillo-Diaz. And Dr. Diaz is going to present, will share with us kind of an overview of the WPS agenda, gaps and opportunities. And we can put his bio in the chat so people can find out more about his work. But over to you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. They asked me to do 15 minutes of context, setting, and history. This history starts in 2000 with 1325. Obviously, transnational feminist activism for peace predates 2000 by a long time, but this is when not only the Security Council, but really when governments get in the business of women, peace, and security. The 30-second version of this history is basically very modest progress for the first 20 years, especially accelerating in the second decade, followed by stagnation and regression in the last 5. Pretty much in the same way that more conflict, less democracy, more military spending has hurt most of our policy agendas on human rights or sustainable development across the board. So if you look at the Security Council, for example, the first few years after 1325, the Council says very little about women in general. They normally would have a kind of ritualistic presidential statement once a year and almost leave it at that. And then between 2008 and 2019, you have 9 new resolutions on women, peace, and security. But more important than that, the Council starts addressing women, peace, and security issues in each crisis that it's discussing. And this is really the biggest change, especially from 2010, 2011 onwards. And this has made a significant difference. It means many perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence are under sanctions for the UN. It means that the Security Council expresses its support for quotas for women for the first time, or for national action plans on women, peace, and security. It means very detailed instructions to the tools of the UN, like peacekeeping missions and special political missions, to advance women, peace, and security. And then this has gotten a lot harder in the last few years with record levels of, I guess, dysfunction and polarization in the Security Council itself. If you look at peace negotiations and mediation, that's one area where we've seen an increasing acceptance of I guess, our advocacy point that more women is better for peace. Much more academic evidence that this is so, much more commitments from governments sort of signing on to these principles. But really, the percentages of women at the peace tables has barely budged. It remains in the single digits. And the percentage of issues on women's rights and gender equalities in peace agreements has also changed very little. It's stayed hovering around 30%. Pretty much since about 2005 or so, the early 2000s. So that's not moving much. The UN is doing much more. So we see that UN-led processes have more women. We see them all have, many consultations with women's organizations and lots of gender experts, and some of them be led by women. But the UN has a lesser and lesser role in mediation in the last few years. So if they were leading on 14 processes in 2011, now they're leading only 4 or something like that. And I'm sure that if you're following the news, you see how the UN is increasingly sidelined in the business of peacemaking. If you look at peacekeeping operations, one of our most expensive tools, we also see that through the years, peacekeeping operations have been doing so much more for women, peace, and security than they did many years ago. The number of women among uniformed peacekeepers has more than doubled across different categories. And they've really prioritized women, peace, and security in different parts of peacekeeping missions, because peacekeeping missions are not just blue helmets. They're accompanied by lots of civilians, experts on security sector reform, rule of law, justice, and all of these things. But what's happened recently is that the world is moving away from peacekeeping operations. I think peacekeeping operations have been cut by half I would say the last decade. I mean, I don't know if I'm getting my numbers right, but they are sharply reducing, and this is leaving an important security vacuum for women. Everything okay? Yeah. If you look at humanitarian action, which is another area where the UN expends a lot of money, I can say without certainty that the UN reaches many more women with targeted programming now, uses much more gender analysis, sex disaggregated data, places more importance on women participating in humanitarian planning, including women's organizations. And this is a big deal. Attention for women's health is older, but people forget the UN did nothing about, say, violence against women in refugee camps until like the late 90s. You know, these are still quite new things. So whether it's specialized nutrition for attention for female-headed households, or sexual and reproductive health care, or violence against women, or education, maternal mortality rates had been dropping until 2020. Rates of enrollment for girls in school had been increasing. But again, I don't know where these trend lines are going to go in the next few years, as huge cuts to ODA take place and humanitarian funding is cut, and we see all of these attacks on women's reproduction, on sexual and reproductive health care. I think the number is that close to 60% of global maternity deaths take place in the 29 countries with a humanitarian plan by the UN. And there are about 44 million girls now out of school, not just in Afghanistan, which everyone knows about, but in the Sahel, in Sudan, in Palestine, in Haiti, et cetera, et cetera. So, and obviously the impact of funding cuts is going to have life and death consequences for millions of women and girls in the world. If we look at another area where the UN made much progress in the last quarter century, and basically the integration of gender issues in peace building and peace consolidation and recovery, I'm sure you've heard, the Peace Building Fund, which is our biggest fund in this area, devoting a significant share of its funding envelope to prioritizing gender issues and advancing gender equality. I think ODA for gender equality basically doubled between 2010 and 2020. So we went basically from $11 billion to $21 billion in that period. 2020, again that year, that's when it peaks, and then it's been dropping since. And then obviously what happens then is, maybe the Peace Building Fund continues to prioritize gender equality, but its overall funding envelope gets reduced by a lot. So the total funding that is going to women's organizations working on social cohesion or whatever it is going to drop significantly. And outside of the UN, if you look at national implementation, when governments get involved, we now have 116 national action plans on women, peace, and security, compared to only 19 in 2010. And obviously, a lot of these national action plans are not worth much. They're not implemented. They have very little money behind them, very little political will behind them. But that's not the case always. And there are many that have actually helped countries advance favorable legislation for women and girls, and set targets for women in the security sector, women in the justice sector, women in politics. These targets rarely existed before, not even 2000, even before 2010. So these are sort of new things. So that's leading to incremental changes on women in these sectors. And one of the clearest signs of progress of the last 25 years is in the investigation and documentation and prosecution of gender-based crimes, nationally and internationally. And obviously that has been one of the biggest results of decades of civil society activism, and the work of women judges and women lawyers. So that's why the presence of women in the justice sector is so important. I think out of 100 international and regional bodies linked to international law in any way, 44% of those judges are now women, which compares with like 32% by 2015, and certainly much, much lower before that. So these leads to changes. But when looking at the future and maybe answering a little bit the question of the event about opportunities for activism by civil society in the context of CSW and women, peace, and security. In my estimation, rather than trying to have WPS be the priority theme of CSW, which I think carries enormous risks, civil society could focus on some of the WPS issues that the Security Council considers sort of out of bounds, or they're much less likely to discuss. So in the Security Council basically since 2008, conflict-related sexual violence has become one of the key issues that they focus on. But obviously there are many more things that are happening to women and girls in these wars, and the Security Council is much more uncomfortable talking about reproductive violence or about reproductive rights or gender persecution, gender apartheid, some of these, targeted violence against women in public life, women human rights defenders, et cetera, et cetera. So that's something that even in this CSW with a justice focus, you have a good opportunity to render it much more visible. And secondly, disarmament. Military spending, which is a huge part of the WPS agenda, but it's something the Security Council doesn't touch. And if you were listening to my narrative about how the UN was doing sort of incremental progress throughout the years and was doing more over the years, you may ask yourself, then why is everything worse? And the reason is because when we're talking about millions or tens of millions or hundreds of millions in interventions, in that span between 2000 and 2025, military spending doubled from $1.3 trillion to 2.7. So that's in some ways, your answer. The Security Council and many governments are unlikely to want to hear this about military spending and disarmament, but it remains a key area for civil society advocacy and to raise that flag and continue putting that on the table, because I think it's at the root of many of these problems. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pablo, for sharing with us all this information. And I just want to correct myself. I didn't properly introduce you at the beginning. Pablo works with UN Women and is a policy specialist on peace and security. So I really appreciate all the information that you provided. Over to you, Ivy.
Yes, and you're from the Canary Islands, is that right?
Should have started with that.
Will put us in the mood of the islands. But thank you so much for that, and thank you for raising the last point about disarmament. Definitely, somehow we don't want to go there, but for civil society, it's glaringly obvious that if we're going to spend more on arms, how are we going to ever achieve peace? And it's really pushing that rock up a hill and then just keeping, we keep slowing ourselves down, even though there's so much good work happening. And I really commend the UN for all the obstacles that, it continues to try and push forward. So I think everyone heard the message, and we know about the funding issues and all of that, but what can we do ourselves where we are in our communities and see the upward trend. There's the world is made up of individuals, and so we always have to, I think, come down to ourselves at the end of the day. So now we have the panelists, and we have so many amazing panelists here with us. Thank you so much for joining us again. We're going to start with, and I understand you have to leave early, so it's okay. And the WPS experts here in the house, as of January 1st, so the DPPA and DPO, which is the UN Department of Political and Peace Building Affairs, and the Political Department of Peace Operations, gender unit is now one. And we have the two here with us. So we have Dr. Abigail Rain and Ruth Aluk. And there were two questions we wanted to pose to you, and please address them how you would like, but I'll just present them now as my screen went blank. What do you see as the most critical gaps in the current WPS agenda, and how could working to engage on CSW help address these gaps? And how can NGOs better bridge policy advocacy with grassroots realities and conflict-affected regions? And anything you would like to add, even how Pablo also left it at the end on what we should focus on. Maybe it's those areas that the Security Council doesn't want to touch. Can you, the more specific, of course, it helps us as a working group. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the invitation to join. It's great to be here. And as you said, my colleague Ruth is here. We're from the Joint Gender Unit, and she'll have to leave in a couple minutes, but we're doing this together. So I just want to first start by saying very much support everything my colleague Pablo has said in terms of context setting and sort of seeing a changing world. And I think when women's civil society pushed for the creation of 1325, their world that they wanted was a world of inclusive peace for everyone based on women's participation, protection, and rights. And the Secretary General's 5 goals for the decade, which includes, a goal on reducing military spending, is a key part of that. And we've actually begun going in the opposite direction. So we can't just add women to the structures that are failing us so miserably. We really do have to shift the system. So on our side, I also would agree with his points that it may not be the best suggestion to have WPS as a dedicated focus area for CSW because the Security Council already covers that, but addressing the other gaps would be very helpful. And also just remembering that women in conflict are part of Beijing and are part of the SDGs. I think a very concrete thing to flag is that in the agreed conclusions, almost every year, many times there is no reference to 1325 until after the zero draft, at which point many advocates have to spend their political capital on referencing a very low bar. Whereas if we just included 1325 in the zero draft of every agreed conclusions, that would create some space for advocates to prioritize the current issues on the agenda that would be more specific. So just one very small, quick thing. And also just welcome the efforts on your part to build coordination across these areas because the Security Council does cover WPS and because funders tend to also fund in line with these siloed approaches that I think has contributed to a divide in terms of like the civil society mobilization, both on the development side and on the peace and security side. And so it does take active work to, work with, members of the NGO Working Group on Women, Peace and Security. I see, Oxfam and WILP are represented in this discussion and their members that overlap in both, and to identify how can we amplify existing work that's being done on the peace and security side. So that's sort of immediate reaction to Pablo, but maybe stepping back just a little bit, I think in terms of the question on what are the challenges that we're facing today, As we've already heard, we have a deeply challenging political context. We're seeing contestation around principles that we've long regarded as settled. Things like the inviolability of human rights, like bodily autonomy, reproductive freedom, the inalienability of women's equal human rights, like to education and political participation, and the strategic imperative of women's political participation for sustaining peace, and a huge rollback and push on gender backlash. And in conflict context, this gender backlash really makes it very challenging to deliver on the goals of women, peace, and security agenda. So we've all heard about Afghanistan with the restrictive policies and edicts that could potentially even amount to a crime against humanity or gender apartheid as under discussion. In Libya and Yemen, we have Mahram requirements that having a male guardian restrict women from participating in public life. There's anti-LGBTQ legislation from Uganda, Burundi, and Ghana. And of course, that's not very different from similar efforts even in this country, in the UK. And there's a major assault on sexual and reproductive health and rights and on women human rights defenders. So we really need to keep all of this in mind and build solidarity together to address some of our common challenges so that we're not siloed. Ruth's going to say a little bit more on the Security Council dynamics, and then we'll go back.
Thank you. I'll try to be brief, especially because Pablo and Abby have already touched on some of the critical issues. But one of the things we've observed with time is that when we're looking at gaps, they are very much context specific, especially for the peacekeeping context where we're looking at 11 missions, but we also have 7 that are increasingly active given the mandates that are in those missions. And so when we look at the gaps, there are those gaps that we witness at the strategic level, which is at the Security Council. And there are those gaps that are also witnessed in mission and also with the respective governments, host countries. Of course, with the Security Council, much has to do with the language, and it's tied to the political environment in which we are operating on, at least in the span of the past 2-3 years, things have increasingly changed, where the basics of gender and WPS is increasingly being challenged in terms of ideology, in terms of meaning, in terms of purpose. And that indeed has implications on the entire institution that strengthens and reinforces the implementation of WPS mandate within the different spectras of operation. The impact on language obviously has an implication on the operational clarity, because as we have noted, it's not just a language on the generalities, but it is what does it really mean to the communities, to the countries, to the lives of women and girls in the different spaces, and how does that language impact on the resourcing, because it may be language that does away with the nitty-gritties of women's participation. That is language that is challenging issues of quotas, the temporary special measures, which of course then undermines accountability in the different layers. It may be language that is linked to sexual reproductive rights. So what does it mean to threats and vulnerabilities that face women? What does it mean in terms of accountability or even addressing impunity within the different accountability and justice regimes? So there is a whole range of issues. And that also brings us to the whole issue of how does this also influence the architecture that is there. Architecture national governments, where we are looking at government's commitment, you'll be looking at commission's commitments, you look at UN and other states' commitment in terms of specialities of gender, specialities of protection, the capabilities, the investment that goes into it, and even the national action plan. Because when you look at the conflict affected areas per se, what you realize is that the capacities are limited, the resources are limited, the operational environment is challenging. So that political commitment has to cut across all these spectras. So when we look at the gaps, the first pointer already alluded to is that gender and women, peace and security must be perceived as a right, getting back to the basics of CEDAW. All these approaches must be linked to the human security centered approaches, which allows for the political, for the security, for environmental, for climate and water view. It means it is a political issue. General assumption we see in most of the host countries is gender WPS is a women's issue. It's an easy issue. And so if it's easy, it need not be prioritized. But if it's political, then there is the reality of determination. who gets what with which resources, how, when, and what then will be prioritized. And then there's just the whole issue of the strategic element, which allows for operational effectiveness. And that we see within the context of analysis and within the context of integration. What the civil society can do better: coordination, synergy, and continuous advocacy. I mean, that is very critical, because as we even speak of localization, we are looking at working more and more with the local women networks, the civil societies, given their urgency, the need for legitimacy, the need for ownership. So it's only important that the NGO system as well may work within that set of operation, especially when the external and the foreign goodwill may be dwindling as we progress. I think that would be it. Thank you.
Maybe just to continue, because we're going to go back and forth because we're doing this together. Thank you so much, Ruth, and I know you probably have to head out in a minute. But all of this said, so what are DPPA and DPO doing to address these challenges? We are working to advance a norms-based approach. The UN is committed to non-discrimination, to equality, to inclusive and sustainable peace, leaving no one left behind. But we need civil society to really demand that we keep to those norms, especially at the local context, where we're increasingly facing critiques about, like, gender as a Western imposition and this kind of thing. Gender is not a Western imposition. Gender equality is, as Ruth said, is a human right. And women in all of their diversity demand their rights everywhere. So, in places like Colombia, when the peace agreement was being taken place, women civil society activists worked with LGBTQI activists to really protect and push back against an effort to not accept the peace agreement because there was like a campaign against it using, anti-LGBTQI messaging. I think all of us really need solidarity together to continue to do that. At the HQ level, DPPA, for example, is supporting the Secretary General's Common Pledge on women's participation, which is trying to address this disconnect between the UN having fewer engagements that it's leading on and working with other mediating entities who can actually do their part to take concrete steps on women's participation. I can speak more to that later. And of course, we're working with civil society, both at HQ and the field, to inform peace processes, political processes in peacekeeping and political contexts. So all of that said, I think this has been a really welcome opportunity for us to hear from all of you what you're thinking about how we can have a more joined up approach. We want to be able to continue these conversations and hope that, like, at least the CSW Declaration perhaps can reference 1325, but more broadly, how can we pick some of these difficult areas that, as Pablo said, the Security Council doesn't always capture, so that we're protecting the gains that we've made and ensuring sort of this more collective security approach that has more impact for women worldwide.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. This is already so enriching. And I didn't mention in the beginning, and thank you, Ruth, who has left us now, but and we do hope, I think we have time for Q&A. At the end, we do have a little time for Q&A, so please keep that in mind as you're listening. And now we have, for civil society, Shireen is online, right? Yes. Okay, so Shireen Jurdi, the president of WILF Lebanon, is on, and she also is in the, she's a member of the steering committee of the Civil Society Organization on Arab Feminist Network. I hope I have that right. And, oh yes, and we also have Dr. Hadil Kazaz, the MENA Regional Gender Coordinator of Oxfam International. And we also pose two questions, which I will read now. What has been your experience advocating for women in conflict at CSW or similar UN spaces? And what tools or messages resonate most with policymakers in your experience?
Yes, thank you, Ivy. Hi, everyone. Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. I'm Shireen Jurdi. Shukran, Ivy and Lily, for the invitation as well. So let me start first by saying that if we want to work according to these spaces, we need first to understand the process. And for us at the CSW, we need first to understand the process, who negotiates priorities, how agreed conclusions are shaped, and where political influence actually sits. This is first. And second, we need to understand also the dynamics of the concepts of each year's CSW, for example, like just to concentrate now on the CSW space. For example, this year is about justice, equality, but for us, as women coming from conflict area, justice is not only a legal thing. Justice is not only about courts. Justice for us is transitional justice. Justice is intersectional justice. So once we understand the dynamics of justice, it's that where we start to know how to advocate. Justice that addresses the conflict-related violence, just now as Abigail and Pablo and others were mentioning about sexual-based violence, about occupation, about militarization, about women exclusion from decision-making. So for me, and framing it this year within the Women, Peace and Security agenda was the starting point for us to start the advocacy. Because for us, justice and inequality are inseparable from security, from peace processes, and from accountability. If access to justice is absent, then women, peace, and security cannot be implemented. It will only be words. It will only be counting participation and not meaningful participation. We have started last year the advocacy for the CSW, and we started to work collectively to see how we can go to the CSW with a collective language. How can we go with a common understanding so that we can also tackle the issues collectively? I'm proud, and I always say that, of the African women's movement and how they go collectively in their discussions. And this is something that we want to do at the MENA level. So for us, if we want to be credible, to start with the advocacy part, then we need to see what is justice for women living in these protracted conflicts, and for us to see that occupation, militarization, and arms proliferation are treated as politically sensitive rather than as gender security issues, as Pablo now was mentioning. So having said this, what we have seen and what we are looking for, and this is something that now Abigail was saying, how we can push civil society or how civil society can work. So for us, advocacy is how our voices are being heard. And up till this second, from the MENA region, we do not have the agreed conclusions from civil society, whether like certain plannings, whether the consultations at the regional level. Anyway, we were not invited to any of these consultations. What we did, we started to do these consultations ourselves through Wolf Lebanon and the Arab Feminist Network. We reach out to the people in charge, whether the Secretariat or the Bureau or the other CSW member states, to look on how we can have an impact within the definition of justice and security that we had. Our advocacy messages is not to work in silos. So how we bring the different frameworks, whether the Beijing, the CEDAW, GRs 30, 33, 40, into the process of putting it and framing it within justice and security. How we move from individual advocacy to movement building. And this is also what we did in terms of the advocacy for this year. We started it last year, but we're pushing forward this year to see how we can collectively work towards a unified language in terms of the aligned and agreed conclusions from MENA. And as such, we're convening next week a strategic webinar where we invite civil society so that we can have it in an inclusive way on one way. And we're also inviting member states so that they are aligned with the agreed conclusions that we're having, because what we're saying is that CSW in the process, we need to have our voices heard and not to have it at the end, and not to have women from MENA or from conflict areas just share their stories. We want to be part of the process that make the decision making. As part of that is the localization process. So the advocacy needs to move from the local to the national, to the regional, and to the international. With the international, we have like partners, just as the NGO CSW, WOLF, and other partners that help us, including Oxfam, so that we can amplify the voices from women from the region. In terms of the tools, definitely the donors or these stakeholders who are in charge of the implementation or the operationalization, they work better with numbers, they work better with concrete examples, and this is where our work falls in. This is where our stories come from. We have also the collective thing, and another thing is that we come up with the concrete actions that are needed to make the change. Last, I want to say that when stakeholders see women as inclusion and justice, and not just as a moral thing or as an add-ons in their agendas, it's only when we see that we can have sustainable peace in the processes that we have. And as we say, there are no peace without women. We see that there are no peace nor justice without women in the process of the implementation or the agreed conclusions within the CSW context, especially now CSW70. And I really hope and I make sure that we here in the room know that what we need to understand and also work towards the realization of making sure that the voices of women from the regions are heard, to make sure that the UN agencies, including the UN Women, which is part of the CSW Secretariat, make sure that women voices from conflict areas are being heard, that they are invited to meetings and not only to consultation, that they are part of the meeting that lead to the agreed conclusions and not to be left behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shireen. Dr. Kazaz?
Good morning, everyone. Good evening. Thank you for having me, and it's an opportunity also to bring a history of involvement in the Women, Peace and Security agenda, where as a Palestinian woman from the Gaza Strip, we started to be interested in it as soon as the 1325 resolution was announced, and even before, but we had always skeptical views of how 1325 resolution and other consecutive resolutions apply to the Palestinian context. And with the genocide that evolved in the Gaza Strip in the last two and something 2 years, it was more of a questioning of what really does women, peace and security mean. After building a momentum and platforms and action plans and being engaged in the CSWs and even have Palestinian women as speakers addressing the General Assembly, and we tried so many things to bring the voices from the ground, which I totally agree with Shireen and other speakers, that without grounding the experiences of women on the ground into the actions we are calling for, nothing will be changing. In the Middle East in general and in Palestine, we are not only struggling with the impact of wars, conflicts, occupations, but also with patriarchal societies and with our attempts to prove ourselves. The last 2 years haven't been easy, with the gender backlash, with the retreat in the human rights agenda, and also with, to be honest, with losing trust in the human rights agenda as stated by the UN, and seeing that there is no strong voices defending the most important achievement of humanity, which is the international human rights and international humanitarian law. Instead of talking about tools and issues that we actually have successfully for many, many years. It brought people to forums, it brought voices, encouraged women to speak their minds, not only in a tokenistic way, but in a real, genuine engagement, bringing grassroots women to UN spaces where they could meet and they could engage with other women from around the world and build solidarity. This has been challenging in the last 2 years, and I want to say I totally agree that one of the most challenging issues for us is really how to go to these spaces, and is it safe for activists to be showing up in a space in New York where they could be deported or arrested or even not even granted the access, and that is happening all over the world, where not only women from the Middle East and North Africa, but women activists from around the world are facing the challenge of showing up to these meetings. Having said that, and having this in mind, that it is really challenging, again, it's not about showing in international places, although for the longest time I was an advocate of bringing local voices to the global agenda and supporting women participation in global meetings. It's about how safe women feel in their communities, and is there any kind of protection when there is no UN agency that is protected, where UNRWA buildings are destroyed, where women are challenged on everyday trips to their livelihood and jobs and schools, where there is lots of all forms of violence subjected to them. This is questioning what we stand for as civil society vis-a-vis who can we advocate for and what kind of policies and that we can demand. If the policymakers are not able actually to stop what's happening and actually guarantee some safe spaces for not only women but for civil society in general to live in peace and dignity and to have their day-to-day security. In terms of actions and what we would like to see, I saw in the chat a comment about should we demand for moving the location for the meeting or have other regional or other global meetings elsewhere where people can feel free to voice their concerns and to demand to basically to say their demands. And I think this is very important ask. I don't know if we are there yet, but it's something that we need to question and need to ask ourselves. The UN as our home, as the home that includes all nations on equal footing, should be a safe space for women activists and humanitarian activists from all over the world to basically say what they think and to voice their concerns and to demand for better access. Regular speech about women, peace, and security shouldn't work this year. It should be a different type of voices and a different type of demand that actually centers the challenges and the concerns of women who face day-to-day challenges and the retreat of human rights, and more than ever a retreat in the gender justice agenda, and the challenging communities are and fundamentalist groups and anti-rights movements who are gaining momentum from permission that is given to them at different levels to basically to do whatever they want without being afraid of accountability. And that takes me to the main and most important ask and thing that I think we should focus on: accountability. Who is accountable for the women, peace, and security agenda? One of the weaknesses of the agenda through its history was who can be held accountable and on equal footing in a way that actually there is the same law applies to all. And that was the beauty of the international human rights law and the international humanitarian law, the equal implementation and equal footing, and assuming that everyone is equal in front of this law, holding accountable the perpetrators, whoever they are, and actually calling for ending all types of wars and conflicts and disarmament. These are basic things that we have been demanding for many, many years, and it didn't really materialize in a way that we can restore the faith and the trust in the UN system and in the global world order as we knew it or as we lived in it for many, many years. I want to say we talk a lot about feminist and intersectional analysis and decolonial approaches. We work a lot in partnership-based advocacy and bringing women voices from the ground to the regional and the global. We provide spaces for women rights and women-led organizations, and we usually have clear and actionable policy asks for women rights organizations on what needs to be done in women, peace, and security in general. However, without having a clear protection, accountability, and upholding of the international humanitarian law and international law, this is not going to take us anywhere. And this is where we need to stand together. That's where we need to be supporting each other and be clear about law should apply to all on equal footing, and we should really be concerned about a human rights violation anywhere in the world, because that's exactly what happens if a UN agency is destroyed in Jerusalem or in the Gaza Strip. The next will happen in another country without any kind of accountability or any kind of protection. So we are in all in it together. We are in all together in this boat, and unless we stand together and support each other and try to stop the madness that we are seeing unfolding around the world, we are basically all in danger. And that's what a feminist peace approach means. Means that we care for each other, we care for the world that we live in, and that's what happens in one spot in the world is the same in any other place in the world. And that's where feminist solidarity and women support groups are important, and one voice is important. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you so much. We are so interconnected. I like that message at the end, and that we do have to care for each other. Absolutely. We have another speaker, and we're running a little over time. I'm not going to cut into your time, don't worry. But that just might mean we have less time for discussion or Q&A. So let me introduce Ursa. That I don't have it in front of me again. So Ursa Ponikaver, I should practice before. She's the first counselor of the permanent mission of Slovenia to the United Nations. And as a member state, we posed 2 questions to you. And this was about how can civil society more effectively engage with UN mechanisms to advance WPS, and what role can local and regional stories play in shaping global agendas? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ivy and Lily. And as others, I also wanted to say that it's a great thing that you have brought us all together and to discuss WPS also in the context of CSW. I want to maybe start with something that was mentioned by others as well somehow. There's not an issue in not having a robust framework when we speak about CSW, and we have Beijing, and when we speak about WPS, and we have all these resolutions. The problem really is the implementation and the current backlash and the geopolitical situation are only widening this gap. I agree with many things that have been said before by Pablo, Ruth, and Abby about need to be a little bit prudent when it comes to discussing more WPS in the context of CSW, because it comes with some risks, and that it's better to focus on the gaps, or addressing the gaps and amplifying existing work. And I think they've already specified which topics would be really helpful in that regard. And addressing these gaps is really the point where your role, the role of civil society, is crucial in somehow bridging this gap between the framework and the implementation, and to somehow holding us all accountable. So I was asked to maybe evolve a little bit more on the engagement side. And of course, I'm going to approach this from the member state perspective. Obviously we have formal channels of engagements, and CSW being one of them, where civil society really has a crucial role, and we are always using this venue to organize as many events, to meet with as many of you as possible. So continue doing this, continue working with us also informally. When we are negotiating agreed conclusions, your advocacy is really crucial for us in helping us working on the language that needs to be reflected in the agreed conclusions or political declaration every 5 years. Then so I was previously posted in Geneva, and I really feel like that UPR is a mechanism that is not sometimes used the way it could be, also to interconnect all these issues that are happening in New York. So I know that we are trying to somehow in our own system, bridge this gap, to pose some recommendations also when it comes to peace and security in the context of gender as well. And of course, use every opportunity that you have to connect with member states and with UN mechanism informally. Every time you meet with us, we write a report. It builds the pressure, and it helps us and you. Of course, all your efforts then help us in our work in mainstreaming this agenda in all fora, including in CSW. While obviously we cannot always deliver the way we want to, still your work make us somehow help push us boundaries, and at the same time, held us accountable. But the main goal is to keep this agenda visible, obviously, and being implemented as much as possible in these challenging times. When it comes to local and regional experiences, my personal experience really is that, those stories from local peace builders really make a difference, because they somehow they really expose the gap, the commitments with their lived realities with women. While this is sometimes extremely difficult to be delivered in some sort of a formal, let's say, forum. So, we have CSO briefers in the council that come and present the situation. Sometimes that's not possible. And what, we've been doing is we've been meeting bilaterally to get these stories and then use them in our work. Or, we've been sometimes organizing informal meetings for different groups, let's say, of countries, to bring those stories to them as well, And I always felt that this brought some sense of an urgency, especially for some contexts which were most difficult to be discussed in a more formal and open format. And I feel that these voices are even more important now, because, we see this in the context of the more shrinking civic space and the backlash. So please, keep on working with us, because, that makes our work easier as well. If it's been mentioned already by Abby, that it would be great to have a little bit stronger language on the WPS in the CSW agreed conclusions or political declaration, to have a reference on 1325. We're trying every year, but I can tell you, even already having one para is very difficult and comes out after very long negotiations. Maybe to conclude, because I know that we are running a little bit out of time, but your advocacy really is crucial. At least I can tell this after working here for some time, not just because, it's really helpful when it comes for you, but also because when we deliver all together with your help, then the results that we have in the document really help peace builders on the ground to somehow, use them in their work. We've concluded with our Security Council membership at the end of December, and I think that the main lesson learned for us really was during those time, that the lesson learned that confirmed, because we have been used to work like this previously, was, that in order to advance any topic, and even more so those difficult ones that now are all gender-related topics, is to build partnerships. And we felt like that only by working together with UN, with civil society, that was basically our only way to really, well, I'm not sure if advance is the right word, but at least to defend what has been there. So I'll stop here, and of course, happy to answer some questions.
Thank you for concluding with that, your experience, the most recent experience as a member of the Security Council. So yes, so we will continue to do our advocacy and do it louder. And as a working group, we've never put together, Lily, we can brainstorm some more, but one of the actions I'm thinking is like, we should have a clear advocacy statement or something for each CSW to reiterate once again, like, yeah, let's include 1325 or whatever else. But yeah, so we do want to open the floor a little bit for Q&A, even if it's for 5 minutes or so. Or we can combine the two even to be creative with the time we have left. Let's see. Let me discuss one moment. What do you think? What do you want to do? That's why I want it's one or the other. Okay, the verdict is Q&A because we do think we want to give you an opportunity. Yes, is there anyone? Please raise your hand if you want to take the mic, or you can put it in the chat. And I know somebody's monitoring the chat. I do see Omna online. Would you like to speak? You can unmute and introduce yourself. I see you're in Malaysia. Okay.
Hi, good morning and good evening. I know people are coming from all over. So I'm Omna Sriniong, and I am with my own gender consultancy, and also I have an NGO called Equal Wings. I'm also with the Baha'i community of Malaysia. Just reflecting, Malaysia has just launched its Women, Peace, Security Action Plan. A lot of it is focused on building capacity in women to participate in peacemaking missions, in disaster risk management, and so on. But then I think fundamentally, even in relation to CSW, there isn't as much visibility of women participating specifically on 1325, the discourse on 1325 in Malaysia. And I think that's a concern. I'm wondering whether that might be the same everywhere else, where which is a little unusual because it is very natural for women to speak about peace and also to participate in that process. But then they're not actively talking about and advocating for this participation. So I'm just wondering whether from the experts who are in the room, do you think that there would be greater value in strengthening those organizations that are heading to CSW ahead of time so that their advocacy and participation at CSW strengthen from grassroots initiatives? I know we don't have much time for that, but given the next 2 months or so, but I'm just wondering whether that might be helpful for those who register for CSW.
Thank you. Now we're going to take 3 questions. Is there someone in the room that has a question they want to address?
Hi.
Yes. Maybe we need to give a mic.
Hi, my name is Kitty Lin from Santa International. I'm a vice president of Santa International in Greater Queens. I represent Thailand and China because I born in Thailand. Originally was Chinese. I discovered that for the past few years, there are not many young women willing to join our club or many other women club. And this is part of the withdrawal because most of the girls are on the internet, on the website, and spend their time mostly, in their own ways. Somehow, we do have a lot of human trafficking problems since COVID and after COVID and last 2 years that we have so many migrants came to America. And it created the opportunity for all those mafia and gangsters built 24/7 human trafficking problem on everywhere in Queens metropolitan area near the subway station. And because of my residential, I resident in Whitestone and Flushing, and we have the commute train to subway, but we all see so many young women are not educated, no qualification of nothing because they escaped from China to come here from the gangster that they have to pay back their cost, whatever they charge them. And this created such a bad atmosphere, such a bad appearance, bad image to all the communities from all the subway trains, 7 train, 74th Street, 82nd Street, all the way to Flushing. And it destroyed so many young citizens because we all have to face the appearance on the way to the bus, from the bus to the subway every day. And I tried to resolve that problem, called the local politician. I even write letter to governors, district attorney, and the new mayor. They respond my email in just 5 minutes. But physically, they always don't have enough budget. They need funds to go back to that. I call 911, 911, 911 every single day. And I got the chief call me back and explain to me that because of all the politics, all the politicians don't coordinate with the police. So we are facing this human trafficking day by day, month by month, and all these young people sold their body just for, whatever cost or whatever charge. It's 24/7 on the street. It's not just indoor. I wonder whether, because I joined Santa to intend to, stand up and fight for the right. And I do have the opportunity to fight every day on the street, everywhere. Somewhere, somehow, there are not many young, generations or young girls willing to join my club. But I have built 50 members between 3 months in Flushing. Flushing is the 3rd booming city in metropolitan. You all have to come for Chinese food. There's 200 restaurants. And all of us felt very disappointed of the atmosphere.
Thank you.
The traffic, even next to Macy, next to all the temple, next to the park, they all stand right there. And
I
NGO,
appreciate you bringing it back
NGO have to
locally,
come
yeah.
in to help us. And I'm going to work on it with local politicians, local government, even the city, the council member. They came up to our event, but do nothing. And this is going to be a nightmare. Hurt all of us, the young people, young children go to school, and parents don't know how to open their eye and tell people that this is a booming city, like Fifth Avenue. We all have everything like upper high class neighborhood.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I have to cut you off because we have to.
We really
we don't have
so
time.
sorry.
Yeah,
Thank you.
But I really thank you for your passion and your persistent work. It's hard work. Civil society, yes, doing this day in, day out is not easy. And thank you for continuing to voice out the realities of what we're suffering here, right here in New York City too, And we have Marie-Claude, and that's the last of the questions. And then we'll have to close and open to the speakers. Okay.
Thank you very much for giving me the floor and for the invitation too. So I'm Marie-Claude Machon-Honoré. I'm the main representative of Business and Professional Women to UNESCO. I'm also past chair and president of the ICNGO at UNESCO, and also several times elected for the liaison committee and for the CCNGO Education 2030 coordination. So yes, I heard very nice and peaceful and solidarity contribution. I think it's very important between women too. I think we should count on feminist diplomacy, which is very important. And as you may know, in France, there was a meeting of the feminist diplomacy. There are 5 members now of this diplomacy. I think all women should join this diplomacy. I think also with Dr. Adil that it's important that women in conflict can be speakers and can take the floor, because this is very important. And the last also question that I already posted on the chat was, how can we make this call and initiative for no peace without women, obviously, because women support the world and humanity. How can we make this efficient for this particular advocacy in year where every country is in conflict? Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to squeeze in one more question.
My apologies. Maybe just taking a little bit of moderator's prerogative. I was just wondering, and maybe of course that not all the questions will be addressed, but just to put this out there, that particularly with Pablo, Ursula, and Abby, you outlined kind of these 3 different areas of action. And also both alluded to kind of the complexities that might involve kind of mixing too much CSW and the WPS agenda. So I'm wondering if you might be able to speak to, as much as you're able to, I think there was something mentioned about the use of the UPR as a tool to gauge progress. I think it'll be helpful to understand how you see that happening. And maybe to also just further understand kind of like specifically where this like normative push can come from civil society as it pertains to some of the things that Abby mentioned about the normative work of DPPA and how civil society can become involved with that. And I don't know if there is openness to addressing kind of the complexities of kind of mixing these 2 areas of action where the Security Council clearly has its own way of functioning, and the WPS agenda is deeply entrenched, 10 resolutions and so on. In Beijing, CSW being the mechanism that follows up on Beijing, it seems to be quite separate, but we as human beings, we don't live siloed lives, right? So how do we how do we kind of consolidate all of this? And I wonder maybe that's something that as a working group we can try to navigate, because the UN system also functions as a system. Like there has to be, I would think that there has to be some level of complementarity. So maybe that's what I'm struggling with, is like where can we find those levels of complementarity? And also just how can we be strategic and politically astute so that we also do not create unnecessary hurdles for ourselves. So it's a bit of a large question, but whatever you can add to that would be very helpful. Thank you.
So please, and any of you, the speakers here, well, I'll start here in the room. Anybody want to address anything?
Thanks, colleagues, for these excellent questions. It's great to have the chance to sort of think beyond our normal discussions. I think I can maybe jump to a couple of the questions, especially around how do we make women's participation effective in conflict context, but also linking a bit with the UPR and broader coordination angle. So as the Secretary General said in the new Agenda for Peace, we're facing patriarchal obstacles to gender equality, right? And in a context where we have a system of patriarchal obstacles that we're dealing with, we can't just affirm the importance of women, peace, and security. We actually have to take targeted measures to advance women's participation and rights in all of the contexts that we're in. So that's why the Secretary General launched this common pledge on women's participation, building on 2 decades of similar commitments on WPS resolutions, which has 4 concrete measures that they're asking all mediating entities to accelerate. One is having concrete targets on women's direct participation in peace processes processes. One is engaging women civil society to inform those peace and political processes. One is appointing senior women as mediators so that we can walk the talk. And finally, we're integrating gender expertise so that peace and political processes are gender responsive. These are very simple, concrete things that either are done or not, but we all need to be doing them. So I just wanted to say, linking to that in terms of coordination more generally, these are principles that are outlined in the WPS resolutions of the Security Council, but they're also interrelated with the broader UN normative commitments. So there was a couple of references to CEDAW. The Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination has general recommendations, including on 30 and 40 around women's participation and on women in conflict contexts. The one on conflict context says that member states who are CEDAW signatories should be advancing towards parity in mediation, including in conflict contexts. The Secretary General has committed the UN to advancing for a minimum of 1/3 of women in peace processes, aiming for 50-50 in other political processes. So I know that some of the civil society members, even in the room in their past, because my previous background was in civil society, have already done some of this groundwork. They will do things like provide shadow reports to the UPR system that inform the UPR reviews. And then when those come out with those recommendations, those can inform the civil society and other briefings at the Security Council and the concrete missions on the ground. So it really is, the UN has many different experts on different things that we try our best to coordinate, but we also need your help in saying, look, we've already shown this is the human rights baseline, this is how it applies within this conflict context, and what are you doing to deliver on your obligations, both for the member states and also for the UN system?
Maybe I'll continue on the UPR. So UPR, I think, is a really good mechanism, to actually bring about some sometimes small but important changes. So every time before that, you have various UPR cycles per year. And every time there's a lot of things happening in Geneva before those cycles start. So Abby already mentioned the shadow reports from civil society, but also there are even informal, sort of briefings that civil society is organizing, like for reviews of certain member states, and usually other member states attend. So, you get informed about this, about the civil society point of view as well, or apart from that, obviously you have several reports that inform the UPR cycle. You have the member states report, you have the UN report, and then you have the CSO part. So when you are preparing for the cycle, this is what you're using, and at the same time, very often. I know that, like Slovenia, because we are very active on gender, we have been regularly approached by the CSOs working on gender, but we were, back then, I was in Geneva before coming to New York, so we were focusing on specific issues, more or less on SRH, how to advance the sexual reproductive health in certain settings, but, we were also sometimes giving recommendations to adopt national action plan on WPS if we saw that things are moving, or, if we were in contact with UN Women and saw that thing, and then this somehow helps. So the member state, accepts this recommendation, and then in 5 years' time, they have to report. So it is a push. I personally have seen some things moving forward. It's a slow process, but it can be used, and it actually delivers. So after being in Geneva, I became a fan of UPR and try to. But in my work here, I've seen that it's mostly topics discussed in Geneva that are then recommended. So now I'm trying to let's try to bring something else as well, right? Some topics that are more discussed here.
Yeah, and similar to the UPR, the processes surrounding CEDAW that Abby mentioned are also a form of soft accountability, which is most of the accountability that we can have on 1325. If you actually read the reports and the recommendations from the CEDAW committee. Now in the majority of countries, they have sections on women, peace and security. Even they ask rich developed countries about how their military exports may impact on some of their women, peace and security obligations. So it's definitely an interesting space for such accountability. You know, the doctor from Palestine, you know, spoke at the core weakness of this agenda being a lack of accountability, and I think that's undeniable, and it is what we have. You know, you can sometimes maybe be, you know, put under bars for killing or raping a woman in war, but you can't be put in prison for not including women enough, which is much of the 1325 agenda is. So we are left with sort of softer accountability mechanisms, and which, you know, a lot of it is pointing it out and talking and hoping anyone cares. Which is why the UN always gets this criticism about being all talk. But I would say that removing women, peace and security from the Security Council, even as frustrated and upset we all may be with the Security Council as a mechanism, especially nowadays, would actually make that accountability problem way worse. And throughout all of my years, I mean, the first time I started working on women, peace and security was back in 2005. And I've heard this thing about women, peace and security in CSW so many times. And I would hear the fear from many of WPS practitioners that then the enemies of the agenda would say, okay, then we don't need to cover it in the Security Council. This is an issue for the Commission on the Status of Women, or it's an issue for ECOSOC. That's something that some superpowers have expressly said many, many times. And I've always been very, very dismissive of that fear, actually, because I felt like women, peace and security was so consolidated within the Security Council, just so many resolutions. And nowadays, more than half of each decision of the Security Council has gender-related language in some form of another. You know, I didn't fear that, you know, that could change. Now I do. Now I do fear it. Now I do think that we live in a world where anything is possible, and this could actually happen, which is why I do think that anything that gives fodder to those who would like to see women, peace and security pushed away from the Security Council has enormous risks. And after all, the Security Council is the only international mechanism that has, you know, sort of enforcement mechanisms, and it has links with, you know, international courts, sanctions committees. It can mandate peacekeeping missions and special political missions and give them detailed instructions. And it can in some ways legislate. It just doesn't. You know, there's not enough agreement among the 15 to do so. But they could mandate more things than they do. But because there isn't agreement, we're left with this more general calls and recommendations and urges. But it is the one place where we would be more connected to that. And throughout, I mean, many of the times, some of the things that the Security Council says get ignored by the conflict parties. Many of them are written in a way that makes them easy to ignore. But there are other times when you know, people have actually been held accountable. You know, during a Security Council visit to the Congo many years ago, the Security Council presented the president with a list of generals that were accused or believed to be condoning or even committing conflict-related sexual violence. And I think all of them eventually ended up being arrested over time and tried. Or, you know, a UN leader might leverage the threat of sanctions so that Riek Machar in South Sudan would speak to his commanders in Western Equatoria and release all of these girls that had been just abducted by some militiamen in that area. these things have happened. In 2023, for example, the Security Council wrote a whole resolution on the Taliban restrictions on women, and its strongest language was on all these bans on women working for the UN and working for NGOs and impeding humanitarian aid. And obviously, this has gotten way worse again. But over the past 2 years, the UN was able to leverage that resolution to find, workarounds and ways of working with the authorities, so that even in the most restrictive and extreme of settings, the UN was able to provide in 2024, for example, humanitarian aid to 9 million women and girls in Afghanistan. That includes channeling funds to thousands of women's organizations in the Taliban's Afghanistan, tens of thousands of women-led businesses, and education programs to hundreds of thousands of Afghan women and girls, which is obviously a drop in the ocean of need, but it is still something worth fighting for in the most restrictive and extreme of settings.
Thank you so much. I see that we have Dr. Kazaz who wants to also come in and answer some of the questions, and we still have our closing speaker. So Dr. Donnelly, so maybe we can spotlight both of them. And if we could have a short reply from Dr. Kazaz, and then we'll move to our closing speaker. I think this shows that this was very much welcome, and maybe we need to continue having this discussion. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much. I will be brief. I would just want to say it's now with the challenging times that we are in, it's more of a time to hold up to our women, peace and security agenda, but actually to go a step forward and a step further by acknowledging that we need to hold accountability very, very high. We need to resource it, because it's not only about financial resources that are diminishing every minute for gender justice work around the world, but it's also about technical expertise, about sharing experiences, about exchanging what worked and what didn't work across the world. And it's also about the time to remember some forgotten conflicts that nobody talks about. Example from our region is the Sahrawi refugees. There are so many things that we need to uphold, because this is the only way forward, to be together and to voice our concerns and to say, this is how we want the future to look like for our children and our next generations. We want a meaningful and really accountable and really truthful peace and security for all. And this cannot be done without standing up together and supporting each other, and also having the voices of the people who really matter on the table, not only tokens and not only representatives of people who will just say what everyone wants to hear. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I will now move over to Dr. Phoebe Donnelly, who's Senior Fellow and Head of Women, Peace and Security at IPI. Over to you, Phoebe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you to the organizers and the fellow speakers. This was just such a rich panel. So I tried to summarize. I came up with 4 themes that seemed really important to me across the remarks. The first one is on bridge building, creating partnerships, and this idea of de-siloing. And I think we kind of left that as a debate. I think Lily's point, as human beings, we don't live siloed lives. I think women on the ground aren't thinking about whether it's WPS or CEDAW. But I guess there must be a middle ground we could reach, because I'm taking Pablo's point about the fear of the reaction to WPS being included too much in CSW, that it moves out of the council. So I think maybe we need to think around how we can be creative around that. But also we talked about using all the tools in the toolbox. So the UPR, CEDAW, we have CSW, we have WPS, and really looking upon what kind of language we have agreed upon in these frameworks. And then I think the power of networks has come up a lot. And so how can CSOs in New York, mine included, many of you in the room, and the UN itself amplify women's voices and networks, especially if they're not able to come to New York for these processes? Second, which came out as something both CSO speakers are doing, is kind of holding member states accountable, supporting them in addressing gaps. Ursa reiterated the need to meet with member states informally. So I think we can be really strategic in talking to member states and providing them with very clear asks and figuring out what they need from civil society. And also the power on of the pressure from civil society. And I think circling back to the way Ivy started around, we don't really have the luxury to be hopeless. I think we also have to bring that kind of energy to our conversations with member states. I met with a member state yesterday and talked about CSW, and she really brought this energy of like, I'm still trying to be positive and realize what this space is and appreciate that we have it even with all these challenges. And she said, you know, she's trying to share this with civil society, but thinking about that, how can we, you know, be happy with the opportunities as we push further, but bring some sort of new energy to them. Last two, the third one is thinking about focusing on the theme and how that creates connections to peace and security. So one idea I haven't heard mentioned, but was thinking about the pillars of WPS, specifically this idea of relief and recovery. I think it's a pillar that doesn't get enough attention, but I think it could really focus on some of the connections to this year's theme around justice. And we've really heard a lot of people, as they think about the future of WPS, wanting more of this justice focus. And then finally, to end, thinking about the root issues and how they cut across, whether it's CSW, WPS, CEDAW. So Pablo flagged disarmament. The colleague from Oxfam talked a lot about safe participation for women from conflict zones. So I think there are other issues that cut across that we could really focus on the issues and less on the exact framework. So I'll leave there. I know we're over time, but thank you for having me, and thank you again for these great remarks.
Thank you so much. We're clapping here. For everyone that showed up and all the speakers who have spoken. And, you know, I'm left with that, you know, hope, the hope message, which actually was I attributed to Lily, was talking about no luxury of hopelessness. And you know, hope, in my view, is an active choice. And so it's not a passive, it's often looked at very passively, and people don't like the word because it sounds so, you know, out there, but it's something that we actively, courageously need to create for ourselves each day, each moment, as things get darker. But, you know, the darker the day, right? Closer the dawn. So we are getting closer to the dawn. We will for sure. And so that's where we want to leave it. And thank you for the conversation. And we will do our best to summarize this and get the recording out so that we can get many more. As you can see, we had quite a few online. I think it was 80 or so at one point. So there's definitely interest, and we will keep up our advocacy efforts. Thank you. Yeah.